November 17th, 1943. Kursk, Soviet Union. The sniper whispered my name before he pulled the trigger. Not my rank, not my unit. My name. The one my mother gave me. The one only 3 people in this entire war knew how to pronounce correctly. If you think you know how war works, you don't. The field was white, not from snow, from ash. 3 days after the Battle of Kursk, nothing moved except the wind. The ground was hard as iron. Frozen blood looked like dark glass under the pale sun. I was part of a cleanup unit, 12 men tasked with searching for survivors among the ruins. We walked in silence, rifles ready, eyes scanning for movement. Most of what we found were bodies. Ours. Theirs. Sometimes you couldn't tell the difference. Uniforms burned away. Faces frozen in expressions that no longer looked human. After the first day, you stopped seeing them as men. They became objects, obstacles, things to step over on your way forward. I crouched beside a burned-out Soviet tank, its turret twisted like a broken neck. The metal still smelled like cordite and burning oil. I raised my scope, scanning the tree line 200 meters ahead. Standard procedure. Clear the area. Mark it safe. Move forward. My breath fogged the lens. The cold bit through my gloves, making my fingers stiff. I adjusted the scope, sweeping left to right. Nothing. Just skeletal trees and shadows that looked like graves. And then I heard it. A voice. Faint, distant, but unmistakably clear. Friedrich. My name. Spoken in German. From the enemy line. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked. My rifle still aimed at the tree line, but my hands had stopped obeying me. Friedrich Baumann. The voice came again, calm, deliberate. Born in Munich, 1921. Your father was a baker on Leopoldstrasse. Your mother played piano at the church on Sundays. My heart slammed against my ribs. No one in my unit knew those details. Not my sergeant, not my commanding officer. Not even the men I'd shared a trench with for 6 months. You have a sister, Anna. She turned 12 in August. She writes you letters every week, even though you rarely write back. My breathing grew shallow. The voice wasn't shouting, it wasn't taunting, it was reading, like someone reciting from a script. How do you know that? I shouted into the emptiness, my voice cracking. Silence. The wind swept across the field, carrying ash like snow. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from behind a collapsed concrete wall. Soviet uniform, rifle slung across his back, hands raised, palms open. He walked toward me with no fear, no hesitation, as if he'd been waiting for me to ask, as if this was a meeting, not an ambush. Because I read your letters, Friedrich. Every single one. The man stopped 10 meters away. Close enough to speak clearly. Too far for me to attack without warning. He was older than me, maybe 35, thin, with sharp cheekbones and hollow eyes. His uniform was clean, too clean for someone who'd been in combat. But his face was the face of someone who had seen too much and remembered everything. Who are you? I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. He smiled. Not mockery, but exhaustion. My name is Dmitry Volkov. I'm a translator for the Red Army's Intelligence Division, and for the last 2 years, I've been reading letters from German soldiers. Intercepted mail, I whispered. He nodded slowly. Thousands of them, every week. Letters to mothers, wives, children, lovers. Some are censored by your officers. Some are not. Yours. He paused. Yours were never censored. My throat tightened. Why? Because you never wrote about strategy. You never wrote about troop movements or supply lines. You only wrote about home. He took a step closer. My rifle twitched, but I didn't fire. You wrote about your sister's birthday party, about how she wanted a dollhouse, but your mother couldn't afford it, so you promised her you'd build one when you got home. I felt my vision blur. You wrote about your father's arthritis, how his hands shake when he needs dough now, how he refuses to retire because the bakery is all he has left. Stop! You wrote about your mother, how she still makes apfelstrudel every Sunday, even though sugar is rationed, how she saves a piece for you, just in case you come home. My finger hovered over the trigger, but I didn't fire, because everything he said was true. Dmitri lowered his hands slowly, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. You don't want to be here, Friedrich. You never did. You wrote that in your very first letter, 3 weeks after you were deployed. He pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket, opened it. You said, "This war feels like a mistake I can't undo, like I stepped into someone else's life and forgot how to step out." My hands began to shake. You had no right to read that. I know. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. But I read it anyway. And after 2 years, Friedrich, I know you better than most of your own men do. The wind howled through the ruins. I wanted to scream, to shoot, to do something that made sense, but nothing made sense anymore. Why are you telling me this? Dmitri looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something I didn't expect. Because you deserve to know that someone heard you. Dmitri sat down on a pile of rubble, as if we were having tea in a cafe instead of standing in a frozen battlefield. Do you know what my job is, Friedrich? I didn't answer. I sit in a basement in Moscow, 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. I translate letters. I read confessions written by men who think no one is listening. And then I file them, catalog them, turn human beings into intelligence reports. He pulled the notebook open again, flipping through pages filled with cramped handwriting. This is yours. He held it up. Pages and pages, dates, summaries, notes in the margins. My life reduced to data points. January 14, 1943. Subject expresses doubt about the Eastern Front campaign. Mentions growing resentment among lower ranks. Morale assessment, deteriorating. March 3, 1943. Subject describes a village burned by his own unit during a retreat. Writes, I don't know what we're saving anymore. Everything we touch turns to ash. June 22, 1943. Subject mentions sister's letter. She asks if he's proud of what he's doing. He doesn't answer her. Psychological assessment, guilt, shame, suppressed trauma. Dmitri closed the notebook. You're not the only one, Friedrich. I've read over 15,000 letters in the last 2 years, from soldiers, officers, even a general once. And do you know what I found? I said nothing. Most of you don't believe in this war anymore. You fight because stopping means dying. You kill because the alternative is being killed. But belief? Purpose? That died long ago. He looked at me with something I didn't expect. Not hatred. Not contempt. Pity. The Soviets use letters like yours for propaganda. We broadcast excerpts on the radio. We print them on leaflets and drop them over German lines. We tell our soldiers, see, even the enemy knows they've lost. My blood ran cold. You used my words against us. Not just yours, thousands. We take the doubt, the fear, the guilt, and we weaponize it. We turn your humanity into a psychological weapon. I stepped forward, rifle raised, rage flooding my chest. You bastard! Yes, he said quietly, without flinching. I am. He didn't move, didn't reach for his weapon. But I'm also the reason 4,000 German soldiers surrendered last month instead of dying in a pointless defense. I'm the reason some of them are still alive, because they heard their own thoughts spoken back to them and realized they weren't alone. I lowered my rifle, not because I trusted him, but because I didn't know what else to do. Why are you here, Dmitri? Why risk your life to tell me this? He stood slowly, brushing ash from his coat. Because I'm tired, Friedrich. Tired of reading letters from men who will be dead by the time I finish translating them. He walked to the edge of the rubble, looking out at the field of frozen bodies. Last week I translated a letter from a boy, 17 years old. He wrote to his mother about how cold it was, how he missed her soup, how he was scared. Dimitri's voice cracked. 2 days later, I received a field report. He'd been killed by artillery fire. His body was never recovered. He turned back to me. I still have his letter. I keep it in my desk, and every morning I look at it and wonder, what was the point? I felt something shift in my chest. You feel guilty? Yes, Io, but you're just doing your job. So are you. The silence that followed was unbearable. Dimitri reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. My letter. The one I'd written 3 days before Kursk. You wrote this the night before the battle. You told your sister you were scared. You told her you didn't think you'd come home. And you asked her to forgive you. For leaving, for fighting, for believing this war meant something. My chest tightened. That letter never reached her, Dimitri continued. It was intercepted at a checkpoint near Smolensk, sent to Moscow for analysis, filed, forgotten. He held it out to me. I kept it. I wasn't supposed to, but I kept it anyway. I stared at the letter, my own handwriting, my own words. Words I thought would never matter. Why? Dimitri's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Because I have a daughter too. She's 13, and if I ever write her a letter like this, I hope someone keeps it. I hope someone remembers that I was more than a soldier, more than a file number. I took the letter with trembling hands, unfolded it, read my own confession written in candlelight, hands shaking from cold and fear. What do you want from me, Dimitri? He looked at me for a long time. Nothing. I just wanted you to know. Someone read it. Someone heard you. And someone remembered. Dimitri turned to walk away, back toward the Soviet line, back to his basement, his files, his endless cataloging of dying men's last words. Wait, he stopped. Why didn't you shoot me? You had a clear shot. You could have killed me before I even knew you were there. Dimitri looked back over his shoulder. Because I've killed enough men whose names I know. He started walking again. Dimitri. He stopped once more. How many letters have you read where the soldier survived? His shoulders sagged. 3%. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. The other 97%? Dead, missing, or captured, and never heard from again. I looked down at the letter in my hands, at the words I'd written to my sister, words I thought would die with me in this frozen field. Am I going to die here, Dimitri? He turned around fully this time. His eyes were wet. I don't know, Friedrich, but if you do, I promise I'll remember you. And then he said something that broke me. I remember all of them. I stood there, holding my letter, watching Dimitri walk back toward the Soviet line. Every instinct I had screamed at me to raise my rifle, to do my duty, to end the threat. But I didn't. Because for the first time in 2 years, I felt seen. Not as a soldier, not as a statistic, not as an enemy, but as a person. I looked down at the letter again, read the final lines I'd written to Anna. I don't know if I'll come home, but if I don't, remember me as I was before all of this. Remember the brother who built you a treehouse, who taught you how to ride a bicycle, who promised to always protect you. I'm sorry I couldn't keep that promise. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in my chest pocket, right over my heart. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I let him go. I watched Dimitri disappear into the tree line, watched him vanish like a ghost, and I made a choice. I didn't report what happened. I told my sergeant I'd cleared the area, marked it safe, moved forward. But I carried that letter with me for the rest of the war. And every night before I slept, I read it. To remind myself that someone, somewhere, knew my name and remembered I was human. Friedrich Baumann survived the war. He returned to Munich in May 1945, to a city that no longer existed. The bakery on Leopoldstrasse was rubble. The church where his mother played piano was a skeleton of blackened stone. His father had died in an air raid in 1944. His mother followed 6 months later, but Anna was alive. She was 15 now, thin, haunted, but alive. She had kept every letter Friedrich had sent, except one, the one he'd written before Kursk. Friedrich never told her what happened to it. He never told anyone about Dmitry Volkov. For 40 years he carried that memory alone. He rebuilt the bakery, married a woman named Greta, had 2 children, lived a quiet life, but he never forgot. Then, in 1985, something changed. The Soviet Union began declassifying wartime archives. A historian named Dr. Elena Morozova was researching psychological warfare tactics. She found a file marked German Correspondence, Intelligence Analysis, 1941-1945. Inside were 15,000 letters, catalogued, translated, annotated, each one marked with a file number, a date, and a name. And at the very end of the file, handwritten in faded ink, was a note. Some of these men died believing no one heard them, but I did. I heard every word. I catalogued every fear. I documented every dream, and I will carry them until I die. They were not just soldiers. They were sons, brothers, fathers, human beings who deserve to be remembered. If anyone ever reads this, know that I tried to honor them, even in the midst of war, even when it meant nothing. It was signed, Dmitry Volkov, Senior Translator, Red Army Intelligence, 1943. Dr. Morozova published the archive in 1986. It became one of the most haunting documents of the Second World War. Not because of what it revealed about military strategy, but because of what it revealed about humanity. Friedrich Baumann's letter was in that archive. File number 7439. Anna read it for the first time when she was 70 years old. She cried for 3 days, not because her brother had been afraid, but because someone, somewhere, had cared enough to keep his words alive. Friedrich wrote to Dr. Morozova in 1987. He asked if she knew what had happened to Dmitry Volkov. She wrote back 6 months later. Dmitry Volkov died in 1982. He was 74 years old. He spent his entire life working as a translator for the Soviet government. In his will, he left instructions for his personal archive to be donated to the state. Inside were notebooks, hundreds of them, each filled with notes, translations, and summaries of letters from German soldiers. He never married, never had children. He lived alone in a small apartment in Moscow, surrounded by the words of men who had died decades before. His neighbors said he talked to himself, that he recited names in his sleep. He was buried in Vedenskoye Cemetery. No military honors, no state recognition, just a grave marked with his name. Friedrich traveled to Moscow in 1989, the year the Berlin Wall fell. He stood in front of Dmitry's grave for 3 hours. Then he did something that no one saw. He left a letter, his final letter to Anna, the one he'd carried with him for 46 years. He placed it on the grave and whispered, "You kept your promise. You remembered. And now, so will I." Friedrich Baumann died in 1995. He was 74 years old. At his funeral, Anna stood in front of a room full of strangers and read from a letter. Not one he'd written, but one that had been written about him. Dr. Morozova had found it in Dmitry's personal archive. It was dated November 18, 1943, one day after the meeting in the field. Today I met a man whose name I'd been reading for 2 years. I thought I knew him, but seeing him, hearing his voice, changed everything. He could have killed me. He should have. But he didn't. I don't know if he'll survive this war, but if he does, I hope he knows that his words mattered, that his fear was valid, that his humanity was real. I will carry his name until I die, and if there is a God, I will tell him that Friedrich Baumann deserved better than this war. Anna's voice broke as she read the final line. He was not my enemy. He was my mirror. War doesn't end with surrender. It ends when the last person who remembers finally lets go. But some names are never forgotten, not because they were heroes, but because they were human. And someone, somewhere, chose to remember. History doesn't repeat itself. It waits for those who forget to listen.